Well, good evening, everyone. It's 7 o'clock. It's time for our July meeting to start. Welcome, everyone, to those of you at home that are Zooming and for our house audience. Just a couple of reminders that if you are not speaking, and no one should be speaking other than our speaker, mute yourselves, but I think someone here is muting you if you don't. The meeting is being recorded, as I've said before. If you speak, you'll appear on the screen and the World Wide Web will see you. So if you're going to speak, put your makeup on. And I'll introduce our speaker, and our speaker will speak for a while. If you wish to ask a question, you can put a question in chat. And to my right here is Stuart Grunnickley, who will let me know if there are any questions. That's at the end. And for those of you in the audience here, just put your hand up and we'll give you a roaming mic so that everyone can hear you. I've got to take my glasses off to read these things. Okay, I'd now like to introduce our speaker, Jennifer Daddow. Jennifer is a community educator, has worked in the education services team at Carers Victoria for 13 years, facilitating workshops for carers and service providers. She's a skilled educator, facilitator, and public speaker. Jennifer has extensive experience working as a community adult educator with a range of diverse groups in the community, welfare and health sectors. She has a master's degree in health and is a qualified workplace trainer and assessor. Okay, so Jennifer, over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your welcome. Is my voice quite audible? Thumbs up? Great.
Yes, it's okay.
Thank you for your welcome, and thank you very much, Kirsten, for organising me to speak here tonight. And as we gather together and focus on the topic at hand, in this NAIDOC week, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we Zoom, on which we live, and on which we share friendships and life together. I would like to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. We acknowledge the continuing connection of the traditional owners to the land and the waters, and we acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. This land is a place of age-old ceremonies, of celebration, initiation and renewal, where Aboriginal peoples have had and continue to have a unique role. So what are you in for tonight? Well, my whole hour won't be speaking. There'll be time for questions, which has been mentioned, and I'm thankful that someone is monitoring the chat line. It just leaves me free with my notes and the screens. And what I propose is a mix of stories around carers so that you have a full understanding of who a carer is, some stats and issues around the context, the caring context, and a simple way to find out about support that is available for carers. So I hope by the end of the evening you feel more informed, not overwhelmed. Some of you may realise that actually you have been a carer for many years and haven't registered this, or someone known to you is a carer. And I will refer you to our website at some stage so you can get more information. So shall we make a start? Are we all okay with that format? Good. So let me ask you a question to begin. Who would like to, let me ask for 3 people to unmute themselves and have a go at defining what you think a carer is. 3 of you. Don't be shy. As an educator, I say there are no wrong answers. Have a go.
Hello.
Yes.
So I think a carer, oftentimes people take turns, like in a family or something. You'll have one person will be well, and then they switch. And then it's, I know certainly for myself, when my dad was towards the end of his life, then it became more one weighted. It's one person looking after the other.
Great beginning. Thank you very much. I'm not sure who that was. You're not on my screen. Are you in the big group?
Kirsten.
Oh, that's Kirsten. Apologies, Kirsten. I couldn't see you because your camera's not on. Terrific. A couple more people. Does anyone want to add to what Kirsten has said?
Well, we're all carers in one way or another, parents especially, and of course anybody who's providing extra help in some way for somebody with special needs.
Great contribution. Thank you. And one more. Well, I will take.
I'll stick one up. Basically, see people get a feed and get an enjoyable life.
Very good. Nice summary there. Thanks, David. So I'm going to give you the official definition, and there are elements in those three contributions that are part of this. So a carer is defined as a person, a family member or friend, so someone who has a relationship, who's providing support to someone who has a chronic illness or a disability or a mental health condition, or is an older person with particular needs. So let me say those four categories again. Why am I dividing it into categories? Because that's the way bureaucratically it's looked at. That's how funding is provided. And of course, our lives don't fall into those categories. They intersect. But in general terms, a carer is a family member or friend providing support to someone with a disability, a mental health illness, a chronic illness, or who is frail and aged. And when I say family, I mean that in the broadest possible context. We talk about family of choice. So that covers all the different nuanced understandings of family within our society. Those in the LGBTH community, those for whom, because culturally their blood family may be somewhere else, but they are tied emotionally to a different set of people. So as broadly as you can think of as family. So if a carer could be a brother or a sister or a parent or a child, anybody who's in a relationship with someone with those particular needs. Now I'm getting my definition from carer legislation, which I'm happy to inform you about later if you're interested. And also this is the way the terminology is used bureaucratically, as I mentioned, in Centrelink and so on. The key part of it is that there's an existing relationship. So we're not talking about the paid worker who comes in to provide support, extra support from council or a service. They should properly be called a support worker. And there are some interesting statistics about carers, but before I get to those, I want to illustrate with a couple of stories that may make that a little bit clearer, that definition. And I'm going to tell you or give you three vignettes if you like. And the first is about Maureen. And Maureen is a woman in her late 50s, and she is supporting aging parents who don't live in the home where Maureen lives, but she travels a couple of suburbs away to take them food, to help them with shopping, to help them with their finances and keep an eye on the house. And in addition, Maureen is supporting her married son whose child has a disability. So Maureen goes once a week to provide support there and give the parents a bit of a break. Now, we would call Maureen a carer because she's taking on extra roles and responsibilities. And we would call Maureen further someone in the sandwich generation because she's caring for older parents who have particular needs, and also someone in the younger generation. So there's one example of a carer. Let me tell you about Tony. So Tony is a chap in his 70s, very healthy and vital, whose younger brother developed Parkinson's in his 40s. And Tony's younger brother was widowed, became a widower, and Tony keeps an eye on his younger brother whose Parkinson's has progressed, and he again doesn't live in the same house as his younger brother, but he is there 2 or 3 times a week supporting his younger brother, both physically and providing emotional support. And really, he's the one person that the younger brother can depend on. And Tony helps his younger brother maintain his independence. And so for that reason, we call Tony a carer, because he's taking on extra roles and responsibilities, perhaps beyond what we would expect a brotherly relationship to involve. And my last story is about Jean and Max, who retired with great dreams of going around Australia, pre-COVID obviously, in their little white van and seeing all the joys that Australia has to offer, until these plans were interrupted with the unexpected arrival back home of their adult son who'd been living away for many, many years, but who was virtually on the edge of homelessness because of his mental health issues. So he moved back in with Joan and Max, and their lives took a different trajectory, and they travelled the sometimes very up and down path of mental health illness. And we call them carers because they were taking on extra roles and responsibilities beyond which we would expect the parenting role to encompass. So just give me a thumbs up if you feel a bit clearer about a carer after you've heard those stories. Thank you, David. I noticed, David, you had some wine earlier, and I thought it was a little unfair to drink it on screen without offering to share to all around, but that's okay. So you're not really a carer, you're a kind of caring person if your partner has gastro for the weekend. That's not really a carer in this definition. We're talking about kind of extended in time, chronic sort of conditions that are ongoing. Now, for those who are interested in stats, I have a few for you, and let me read them because there's some up-to-date stats taken from last year from Access Economics. And these stats, Deloitte Access Economics for 2020, these stats are as up-to-date as we have in Australia. Approximately 60% of all carers are female. There are almost 2.8 carers around 2.8 million carers around Australia. Half of all carers live in a household with the lowest, in the lower economic brackets. About 22% of primary carers were employed full-time last year in comparison to the population average of 43%. What does that tell you? Does someone want to unmute themselves? That stat about employment. Approximately half of primary carers were employed compared with the general population. Well, what it tells me is that the effect on carers of their capacity to be in the workforce is quite profound, and that is one of the issues for carers. Now, here's one that you'll enjoy, I think, or be shocked at, one or the t'other. So, Access Economics have done number crunching over the years, and they've estimated the cost of replacement care. So if all those family members and friends who are providing care, those daily tasks, that daily support, if they all down tooled and said, nope, we're not going on, the replacement care the bill for the replacement care across Australia with paid workers, paid support workers, does anyone want to have a guess?
Many billions.
Yes, I'm not sure who said that, but many billions is it. The figure is 77.9 billion. In other words, carers are providing a huge amount of valuable work. And when I started in this job 13 years ago, I remember that replacement care cost was 49 billion. I remember thinking that was a big number. So of course it's gone up. And I guess for that reason, the pragmatic part of my brain thinks, well, it makes sense to support carers because they are saving us, all the governments, both state and federal, a huge whack of money. So let's keep the carers healthy. That's the political side of my brain. The kind of the more kind of human, compassionate side of my brain says, well, we need to keep carers healthy and well because their lives are of equal value to the person they're supporting, and they are equally entitled to joy and health and capacity to be in the workforce if they so choose. Let me give you a surprise, not a stat, but a little vignette about young carers. So young carers, we talk about up to the age of 25, which doesn't sound that young, but we are talking, kids that are in school. And you might think, well, surely they're not part of the picture. And it is true that in the past they weren't really seen. They were an invisible part of our community. But since about the 90s, young carers have been studied as a kind of an entity or a cohort. And let me give you an example of what a young carer might do. They might be the sibling of a child with a severe disability, and they're involved in informal care. Their life might in fact play second fiddle to that child with those particular needs. But they are involved equally with the other family members in providing support to that child with a disability. Or it may be that a young carer is a child in a family with younger siblings, so a high school kid who's in a single parent household where the parent has perhaps a mental health condition and is on a bit of a roller coaster with that. And so when things are bad, that kid in secondary school is responsible for, getting the younger siblings off to school and so forth, and making sure there's coffee and milk and bread at home. It may be that child is not really seen for what they do at school. It's just noted by the teachers that they're a bit disconnected and a bit dishevelled when they come to school, and they haven't done their homework, and they're a bit disconnected from their peers as well as their work. And we would call that young person a young carer. And what we do know about young carers, and again, it's been estimated that if all young carers were averaged out, a way of looking at it is to imagine there'd be 2 in every classroom in Australia. Not literally in every classroom, but as a way of trying to quantify young carers. And what we do know about young carers is that unless there is some intervention and their own needs are recognised, the trajectory for their future is poor. That's the grim reality. Often their developmental needs may not be met. Basic needs for nutrition, Their social needs may not be met, their education needs. And so young carers are a cohort that is causing a lot of those in the community and health sector to be aware of and trying to support. So there are some stats, but I want to end with the stat that is perhaps the most arresting, I think, and that is that Australian research, which echoes the research which, around the world, the US, the UK, Canada, other European cities where caring as a role is researched. The Australian stat that I'm going to give you was a stat from a study done by a chap for the Australian Institute of Family Studies, Edwards, who in his research came to the conclusion that carers were 40% more likely than the general population to develop their own mental and physical illness as a result of their caring. Now, he wasn't creating a cause and effect argument. He wasn't saying if you are a carer, you'll get sick. But to read his study, what you realise is that if you are a carer who doesn't acknowledge your own needs, who doesn't get a break, who doesn't have some sense of purpose and joy in your own life, whose whole life is subservient to the needs of that other person, then you are vulnerable. So here endeth my stats, and I wonder if there are any comments before I move on. Are you surprised?
I am surprised, and I'm very concerned about that. I had no idea whatsoever that carers would be affected in that way, and it's a real worry to me.
I'm not sure who that was speaking. Who was that?
That's Chris Lovelock.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you. Any other comments? Or, not perhaps just a comment on the stats, did any people that you know come to mind who you may not have picked as a carer or whom you hadn't seen in that light before?
Hello.
Hello, Kirsten.
Hi. I just wanted to comment because I had a very brief stint of caring, unless you count parenthood.
We're not counting parenthood.
Yes, right.
Parenthood is part of the normal life with its ups and downs.
Right.
So let me be very clear that, yes, we're all caring when we're parents, but in terms of carers, no, unless you're a parent of a child with a disability or some particular issue.
So in my very brief stint of it, what I realized was it's just so important that you know that you've got breaks so that you can look forward to, and you know when your scheduled break is, because like you said earlier, you suddenly feel, hey, my whole life is serving this other person. Whereas if you know you've got breaks, then everything starts to normalize. Yeah.
Kirsten, that is an extremely helpful and relevant comment. And I think if I were to get one tattoo in my life, it would be across my arm, to show to carers, please take a break. It's vital. You can't be on duty 24 hours a day and not burn out and get sick. It's just not possible.
And the other thing I found out was it was like we were behind the 8 ball in all the learning. Like you only find out as things transpire. It's the opposite to having a baby. They don't tell you all the stuff with a baby, and they don't tell you all the stuff with an elderly parent that's on the trajectory down until it hits you. Yeah.
So true. Unfortunately, for many carers, that is the story. It's better than it used to be, and I will tell you about the system that is there to support carers in a moment. And now after tonight, you'll be able to, when you meet a carer, point them in the right direction, hopefully with a simple piece of information that they can then use to begin that journey of understanding. Thanks for those comments. I'm going to share my screen, and what I want to do is, can you see that?
Yes, we can see that.
So I'm just going to flip through. Now, for some reason, it's gone ahead of where I wanted it to go. So let me stop sharing and I'll just give it one more try. And if it doesn't work, I'll do it verbally. This is the one that I want. Can you all see that slide? I'm trying to enlarge it, but it's not being very cooperative.
You're not sharing.
No.
Okay. I will give the lucky last try and then I will leave it if it's not working.
Okay, it's come good now.
Thank you. Now you can see all my notes as well, but for some reason it's not, this is definitely the last shot. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing because something's happened there. So I would like to read out a list of issues and 3 of you can jump in and say which one you would like me to elaborate on. So in that picture of a carer being more vulnerable than the general population in many ways, particularly where their caring role is not acknowledged either by themselves or others, and they're not getting those breaks that Kirsten mentioned. There are a number of issues within that vulnerability, and I'll read out some, and those that are loudest and strongest get dibs on which you'd like me to elaborate on. One of the issues facing many carers is a whole clutch of really strong emotions which they are loath to acknowledge for themselves and loath to talk about with others. And those strong emotions include grief and anger and frustration. That is a big thing for carers, the grief. I might put dibs in on talking about that one. I think it's important. Another big issue for carers is guilt. Another big issue for carers is social isolation. Another issue for carers is feeling disempowered and confused by the system. And, slash the kind of thing that Kirsten said, lack of information and just not knowing what's out there. Another issue for carers is what I call juggling. Juggling their responsibilities as a carer with paid work if they're in it, whether it be part-time or whatever, with other relationships, with the partner, with other children, with friendships, with wider family members, that constant juggling act. There's a few. Does anybody want to jump in?
I like the first one, thanks. Guilt, etc.
Oh, Colin, I really like a man that knows what he wants. Guilt for Colin. Anyone else?
It's going to be my comment as well.
Guilt, great.
Frustration.
Frustration.
That came from both David and Chris.
Social isolation.
Yep.
I would have said grief.
Great. I'm going to talk a bit about them. Thank you. Let me talk about guilt. I have yet to meet a carer in all my time that, along with their caring role, doesn't have a big dollop of guilt. Like cream on a dessert, only not as nice. The guilt is often what we call false guilt. Not false because they're not feeling it, but false in the sense, or disproportionate guilt is kind of the official term. It's guilt that derives from this nebulous kind of feeling that they're not doing enough. So they haven't actually done anything wrong, which we associate with guilt and our moral compass and so forth. But what carers are heavily burdened with is this sense they're not doing enough. They have feelings that they are ashamed of, like resentment or anger. They sometimes wish they could just leave and step out of the situation. That causes immense guilt. They might lose their patience with the person they're supporting. That causes immense guilt. They have other relationships that they're neglecting. That causes guilt. They didn't get the illness or the disease or have the chronic results of an accident. That causes guilt. So there are many aspects of the caring role which cause guilt, and this guilt can prevent carers from taking those breaks that Kirsten mentioned, from seeking joy in their own life. I tell you, the number of carers that say, oh, I couldn't possibly go out and have a coffee, you know, while so-and-so is at home. So the guilt is like a tight tourniquet around their spirits and tying them up and preventing them from that self-care, which is so important, and putting them in that vulnerable, 40% more likely to develop their own mental or physical illness that I mentioned from the Edwards report. Let me talk about grief. So we're very clear when it comes to bereavement what grief is. Would you agree? We can pinpoint the moment when someone passes away, and we have ways of recognising that bereavement grief and honouring the person and supporting the one who is bereaved and left behind. What we find with carers, however, and let me give you a kind of an example. Let me give you an example of Joan and Ron. And this is something that you'll know well once I launch into the little story. So just imagine Joan and Ron as, say, a married couple. It could be Ron and John. It could be any relationship, but Joan and Ron, and they have a married life together with the normal ups and downs and so forth. And Joan notices that Ron isn't quite as sharp as he used to be. He's getting forgetful. He forgets to put the bins out on bin night. He's normally on top of paying the bills. He's just not as sharp. But, they've been married a long time, and Joan steps into the breach and is a stoic kind of person and picks up, fills in the gaps. Doesn't mention anything to anybody, just, oh, well, Then time goes on, and over a period of months, it's not only Ron's memory that becomes dodgy, but his behaviour seems to be changing. His personality, his capacity for everyday normal living seems to be diminishing. So Joan keeps this kind of information to herself till it becomes just so difficult that she makes an appointment to see the doctor. And as a result of that, there's a series of tests that Ron undergoes. And what do you think they're going to discover? Dementia. I read your lips, Colin. And at this stage, Joan might tell the adult offspring who are living elsewhere and, begin to kind of let this news out a little bit, but wants to be private as well for Ron's sake. The months might go past, maybe 1 or 2 years, maybe more, but Ron gets worse and worse. And in the end, for his own safety, For her failing health, Ron goes into residential care and so on. So you know the trajectory, you understand this sequence that I'm drawing. Now, as a carer association, we would say at every point along that storyline, there is loss. And wherever there's loss, there's grief. But it's not the grief of bereavement. It's the loss of relationship. It's the loss of partnership. It's the loss of dreams for the future. It's a loss of a sense of Joan's own life. And people might say to Joan, as I've heard more times than I care to remember, well, you're lucky you've still got Ron, which throws Joan into even more of a flummox. You know, has she still got Ron? She certainly hasn't got the Ron that she once knew. And this series of losses we call carer grief. There's no definitive end. There's no point at which all the support comes rushing in and the flowers and the cards. There's just this grinding series of losses. And for many carers, you can imagine for the parent of a child with a disability, while they watch other children reach certain developmental goals, depending on the child's disability, of course, you know, that loss might be reinforced. For someone, the couple that I mentioned whose adult son moved back with them, you know, the loss is of this young carefree man who had so much promise. And hopefully his life still has meaning and is able to go on, but in their heart of hearts, there is loss for them. So carer loss and grief is a big thing. And like guilt, it ties carers up in knots because they often don't recognise it in themselves. Does that make sense to you? Thanks, Colin. And the thing is, next is the social isolation, the last of these three issues. And I'm watching the time. So social isolation is something that most carers talk about. So prior to whatever the condition is that has entered into the life of this family or friendship group or whatever it is, if you asked a carer to draw their life, they might have all these little bubbles out, you know, the book club on a Monday, and let's forget COVID for this, you know, book club and lunch with friends, you know, once a month, and some kind of stamp collecting or quilt making or some hobby or a gardening club or a once a month dinner club. So all these lovely interests, which, you know, for many of us in Australia, we're privileged to enjoy that quality of life. But we find with many carers that one by one, those get crossed off, those little bubbles, partly because of the pressure of time, partly because not everybody understands what's happening at home for the carer and the person they're supporting, so it's easier just to withdraw. Partly because the carer might be so tired they just cannot manage that. Partly because our society is often very couples oriented, so they might feel if they were once in something as a couple, you know, they're not as welcome as they might have been. There are many issues which cause that increasing withdrawal into the small bubble of the carer and the person that they are supporting. And one of the roles of an organisation such as ours is to get carers reconnected again. And to come back to Kirsten's point, to do that, you just have to have breaks and support so you can pursue those other interests. How are you going? Are your ears hurting yet?
Not at all.
Thank you, David. So I'm going to throw in at this point, on the back of sort of the vulnerability theme, I guess, which I've built, a piece of information for you, and it's called the Carer Recognition Act. So in 2010, the federal government at that time passed a whole bunch. If I was a journalist, I'd say a raft of different acts as part of a Stronger, Fairer Australia. And one of the vulnerable groups which was identified for, you know, some of the things that I've just touched on tonight, and, you know, good quantitative and qualitative research that backs that up, not just anecdotal, you know, information. Carer was recognised as vulnerable, and the Carer Recognition Act was passed in 2010 federally, and then in Victoria in 2012. And now all the states have their own, and they kind of mix and match. They're not, just slightly different wording. The aim of the federal one was to drive attitudinal change. That is part of the stated aim in the supporting documentation. If you want to look it up, you're welcome to do so. Just Google Carer Recognition Act Federal. And the attitudinal change was to do with the lack, up till that point, the lack of recognition of the carer and all they do, and the lack and their consequent vulnerability. So let me give you an example. A carer might have their person they're supporting in hospital. Maybe the person, you know, just had to have a simple operation, but they've got some underlying chronic condition. And in the bad old days, the hospitals would write a discharge plan and say you need to do this physio with them and this and that and the other, and they've got to have this sort of food, and yep, send them home. Now, the Carer Recognition Act states in its supporting documentation that anything which affects that patient needs to be also done in consultation with the carer. You can't just send the patient home and expect that the carer's got the health or the capacity or the wherewithal to undertake that support at home. So the Carer Recognition Act is kind of an ally of a carer. And I know when it came out, I was working for Carers Vic, what was then called the district nursing. Do you remember that? It's now called Bolton Clark District Nursing Service. They rewrote a lot of their documentation to make sure that the carer was included in decision making that affected the patient. So that's kind of an example. It also means that where you are blocked off from knowing what's going on about the patient, and someone who's uninformed says, oh, well, it's privacy, we can't tell you, that actually doesn't stand up. There is specific documentation, particularly in the mental health field, that says the carer must be included if there are decisions about the patient that affect the carer as well. So I see this documentation as a great step forward. There's a long way to go, but it's a start. And I mentioned before the pragmatic part of my brain and the replacement cost for carers. So I'm wondering, on the one hand, whether the government thought, well, we better look after carers because it's going to cost us a heck of a lot of money if we don't, or whether they thought these are a vulnerable group and we want to help them. Who am I to say what the motivation was behind that decision? But it's interesting to know that there is now legislation around carers. Thank you. Now, good question. So the question is, did you all see that on chat? Can someone read that out? So you have a change from my voice.
How does the need for carers consideration interact with the NDIS?
Fabulous question. So in a moment, I'm going to tell you what the supports are for carers. And let me say that the supports, the funding that's available for the carer is completely separate to whatever supports, either through the NDIS or through My Aged Care, that the person with the issue has. Completely separate. So you might be in a partnership with someone and they're getting a My Aged Care package. That does not affect your eligibility for funding that's available for carers. It's quite separate. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jennifer, could I interrupt for a moment, please?
Please do.
You say that it doesn't affect the carer or the carer's ability to access finance, but what is the legal position? What actually constitutes the legal position of a carer?
What do you mean by legal position? Is that Chris?
Yes, this
What
is
do you mean
Chris.
by legal position, Chris?
What is my position? I regard myself as a carer for this person, but I don't have anything formal about it.
Okay, great question, Chris. So the thing about the caring role is it is based on the activities of what you do. So for example, for Centrelink payments, do you want me to say a word about those?
No, Centrelink is not relevant in my case. I am financially independent, and I'm quite happy.
Even so, there's two lots of Centrelink payments for carers, and one of them you may well be eligible for, Chris. So one of them is called the carer allowance, which is just a small amount each week, and it's only recently become means tested, but it's a very high threshold.
Jennifer, if I could interrupt again, I'm sorry, I'm not interested in the financial arrangement.
Okay. Is anyone else interested, or will I move on? So the point that I was going to get to, Chris, is it depends which service you're looking at, what the definition is. So Centrelink have their own criteria for deciding if you're a carer based on the tasks that you do. Do you give them their medication? Do you need to help them out of bed? Do you help them with their toileting? Are you responsible for their social activities and so forth? Where the actual decision gets made in services is going through what's called the carer gateway. So let me say a word about the carer gateway. And this is the simple number that you could give someone who you know is a carer. So you all know that the changing environment over the past few years has meant a lot of things have got centralised. You've all heard of My Aged Care, I imagine. So it's the Australia-wide system, kind of the one-stop. You start there and with getting services, get registered with them. NDIS has been mentioned, the insurance scheme for those with a disability. Again, sort of the one place to begin that journey. And so in 2020, last year in April, just in the middle of COVID, the Carer Gateway was launched. And this is the way that funding is provided through the federal government across Australia to carers. And what happens is, and Chris, you'll see where I'm going with this in a moment, a person who believes they are a carer, because Chris, no one's going to give you a letter. Well, you might. If the person has a particular diagnosis that you're supporting, you might get a letter to say you're the carer. But if their situation is more nebulous than that and doesn't actually have a diagnosis, you're still a carer, because you go to the Carer Gateway and there's a bit of an assessment done of you. And it's based on what you do for that other person. And then according to where you live in Australia, you are referred to the local hands-on services that provide either flexible respite, for example, someone to come into your home, Chris, and give you a break while you go out, or someone to be with your partner and take them out, you know, whatever it is that you need. That's why it's called flexible respite. And that is provided by different organisations across the state and across Australia. It depends where you live, and it's all on the Carer Gateway if you want to look up who's responsible for your services. So Carers Victoria, our thing is someone declares themselves a carer, then they're a carer. As simple as that. Other services, you will have to go through some kind of assessment of what you do. Does that kind of answer you? There's no black and white response, Chris. That's the issue. There's no, because the caring role is so varied and so nuanced, it's not possible to have, you can imagine if you're feeding someone who has a disability, that's very different to providing emotional support for someone with a mental health illness. So that unfortunately, it's not possible to have the kind of bald black or white statement that I think you're asking for.
I am a black and white person, and I'm not surprised that you cannot give me the answer for that.
There is no answer. You can look up a definition of a carer and see, do I fall into that? Yes, you would, from what you've just said, but you're looking for some stated piece of paper that says you're a carer. Is that what you want when you use the word legal?
Jen, I'm not really sure exactly what I'm looking for. I'm looking for some sort of recognition from family. My problem is that the family does not agree that their mother is needing care. And the family has obtained, and this is another, if I could just go back to a subject that you mentioned earlier, you talked about tests, psychology type tests that determined whether a person had dementia. I believe that these tests are not worth two squirts of whatever. And I believe that because I live with this person 24 hours a day, I am in a better position to make an assessment than a doctor who sees her for half an hour.
Okay, Chris, you've really touched on some extremely pertinent issues, and I want to comment on a couple of them. I see what you're saying about family. Now I see where you're going. Okay, I want to say a word about families when you are the carer. So, most families have hairline cracks in them. Now, you all may come from perfect families. I certainly don't. However, and those cracks can be papered over when things are going well. But what we know, and this is a biggie, Chris, that when you add in a significant change in one person, whether it's a diagnosed illness or not, that requires someone to take on that caring role, those cracks can open right up. And particularly around the dementia issue, adult family, it's almost classic that it is an uphill battle for them to understand, for them to believe the experience of the person who's with that dementia sufferer all the time. They might visit for 5 minutes and say, Mum was fine today, I don't know what you're on about. They might fight amongst themselves about what the best way to care is. The carer often gets criticised that they're not doing enough or they're doing too much or whatever it is. So that whole issue of dynamics within the family and how to navigate that is another one of those issues that carers face, along with grief and guilt and those strong emotions. The misunderstanding or the lack of insight of family members into your role. And Chris, there is nothing that anyone can give you. You could get a carer card from the state government and say, well, they think I'm a carer. But in terms of those mental changes that they need to make in their thinking, which is very complicated when it's all about relationships, there's not a single something that definitively says, you know, believe me, this is what happens. What we do suggest to carers in a situation like yours, one of the supports that's available through the gateway and then provided locally through your hands-on carer support services, and you might think, well, what I'm about to say is a load of waffle, but I'll throw it in anyway, is counselling for carers. Now, I'm not talking the old Freudian model of, lying on the couch and going back to whatever you think counselling is. It's about issues like this, Chris. It's for the carer to have a professional, and this is provided free, a professional to chew over these issues. For example, it might be a carer that is struggling with someone who's suffering perhaps with an undiagnosed dementia, but their main issue is the family not really coming on board. And so the counselling is to help the carer get through these, chew it over. How can I approach this, to build that bridge with family so there's understanding. Counselling also helps carers with grief issues and the guilt and those other things that I mentioned. So that was a very verbose response to your question, Chris.
It was a fairly verbose question.
That's generous of you to say that, to make me feel better. I think it's like putting a little nest together, Chris. I'm struggling for a metaphor, but this is the one that's coming to mind. And that is what I'm giving you tonight is a few little wisps here and there. And maybe it's better to say, let's switch metaphors. I hope tonight I'm planting the seed, and it's just a seed. And I hope from that, especially when I tell you where to go for this information a little bit more, you are able to grow your understanding and find ways to answer some of those at the moment unanswerable questions that you have. We really encourage carers to join a carer support group. Now, you're all in a PC users group. And why is that? Because you have a common interest and you love yakking about it. And if you're in a choir, you love being with people who sing. If you're a carer, anybody going through a rough time, it's great to be with other carers. You pick up information that might help you negotiate your family. You pick up information about a service you may not have known about, and so forth and so on. You mightn't even talk about your caring role when you go to a meeting or an activity, but you know that the other person understands what you're going through, even if their care situation is different to yours. Now, I'm watching the time at 7:58, and I said I'd give you time for questions. It's so wicked that I haven't. So let me just get back to the overarching carer gateway. So I'm going to give you the number in just a minute because my PowerPoint's being uncooperative. So the carer gateway is 1800 422 737. I suggest you look on their website. So you'll find information there and you can just gather it bit by bit. There's little courses you can do online that are, free. You can see who's responsible for the services in your local area, carer support services. So when you get kind of hooked into your local area, having gone through the gateway and registered, okay, parentheses, it is good to register with the carer gateway because they are also the number that you ring for emergency respite. So if you are a carer looking after someone at home, for example, and your appendix pops in the night or something and you have to go into hospital and you've got somebody who's dependent on you in the home, the carer gateway is the number you ring for emergency respite for someone to come into the home and be with your person. A little hint though, if that does happen, you can take your person in the ambulance with you, and the hospital social workers will sort it out the next morning. Anyway, that's by the by. So the carer gateway. So when you get to your local services, they will use both federal money and state money called Support for Carers program to help you with flexible respite. Now, I know, Chris, you may, or someone else may, how much are you eligible for? There is no published figure. What is done is an assessment. Do you need help with this or that or whatever? And it's worked out based on what your needs are.
I don't need any financial support. I need moral support from my partner's family.
Yep. It's a tough one, Chris. Well, the kind of support that could be offered could be kind of a coaching program to help you with that, or a counselling, someone for you to talk that over with, because it sounds like it's a very hard road that you're travelling with that.
Thanks, Jen. That's very encouraging. I wish I could get the same thing from my partner's family.
I don't know if it helps you to know that it's quite a common situation, Chris. And it's a tough one. And the thing about this whole caring role is it is tough because there's emotional connections all the way around it. I'm feeling, I know that I've gone over time. I'm feeling that I really want to say that, because someone might need to hear this, not all caring situations are based on love, which is why I get a bit nervous when someone talks about, you know, your loved one. Some carers are just, it's pure duty, and the buck stops with them and there's no one else to do it. And I take my hat off to those people, because I think it takes an enormous amount of bravery to take on that role. And it may be that the daughter has to look after the father who was once, you know, her abuser. I mean, there are so many, it may be, and how many times have I heard this story, that a couple is divorced, but one of them becomes, you know, needy with a chronic illness or something, and so the ex-partner moves in and steps into the breach to become their carer. There's all sorts of nuances, but the nub of it is there's always emotion involved, and it's hard. I have really overtaxed your ears, and I apologise. Are there questions? Kirsten, have we got time for 5 minutes of questions?
Yes.
It's Peter here. Yes, you certainly have. Is there anyone in the room that would like to ask a question of Jennifer? No one in the room that's got a question for Jennifer? Unless someone else comes up later, is anyone at home that would like to ask a question of Jennifer? Stuart tells me there's no questions on chat. Is there anyone? Maybe
There are 2 questions on chat, Peter.
Oh, okay. Stuart?
The 2 questions on chat have been answered.
From Richard Bradford and Peter Carpenter.
I'm not sure that I've answered Richard's question.
But I felt that you answered Richard's question, but we better ask Richard that.
The Carer Gateway number up there isn't correct. It's 1800 422 737. Unless my notes are incorrect.
Maybe Jennifer, you could put it on chat and people can then read it and copy it down.
Someone's done it. Thank you. Can you comment on getting support services in place for carer and client in a timely manner? Oh, another big topic. The sooner you can start to get supports in, the better. I think that's the nub of my wisdom for you. It always helps to start off in the shallow end rather than wait till there's a big catastrophe and big help is needed and no one's used to someone else coming into the home and all hell breaks loose. We always suggest to carers, for example, depending on their circumstances, I'm just generalising here, you know, if you're eligible through your local services that you've gotten onto through the gateway and then devolved down to your local support services, for some home help, for some cleaning. That's a pretty innocuous, a pretty straightforward way to begin to get everyone, you as the carer and the person as the care recipient, used to someone else coming in the home. And it's a little way to stop everything revolving around you. And when you think of it, that's best for the care recipient as well, because it broadens the network. So you might start with that, and when everyone's used to that, in a timely manner, you move on to that kind of flexible respite. maybe you get them into a day activity group, or if that's too much, you get someone into the home to take them out because they love the trains and go off to a train museum, or, you know, some outing or something that taps into their interest. This respite is for you, not for them. It's for you to have a break. So my advice is start as soon as you can and start small. Don't wait till you think, because, you know, otherwise if you know this is an ongoing condition that's only going to get worse with time, and that's what we're talking about in this landscape, the sooner you can get help, the better. There are supports out there. They mightn't be ideal. How easy is it to get CHSP? So you're talking about the Commonwealth Home Support Program. That's quite separate to what is offered to carers. That is for the care recipient, and I'm not going to comment on that whole system. We do have courses on that in the aged care program, but what I'm talking about is for the carer. The Commonwealth Home Support Program is based on the care recipient's needs. If the carer as well, they could be getting their own package, but I'm talking about the carer as a carer. So will I do my auctioneers thing and say, are we all done? Get my little hammer out.
I would like to say, I'm not an official of MelbPC user group, but I would like to congratulate you, Jennifer, on a marvelous talk that's been extremely interesting for me. I have problems that are not related to financial arrangements, but more emotional type problems. And I have found what you have had to say very informative and I would hope helpful.
Thank you, Chris. That's very kind of you to say. And let me say, I'm part of an education team at Carers Victoria. We go across the state doing workshops. It's all had to be on Zoom with COVID, but we're back to face. We run a fabulous dementia program that goes over 3 weeks, but three sequenced, 3 hours over 3 weeks. And if you look on our website, you'll see what's available. We go out to groups because it's an education thing. So that's another reason to click into your local supports, because then we can come to a group, a carer group. We have some online things that you can just, log on to at the moment. All right.
Well, thank you very much for that, Jennifer. My wife and I often talk about this because we are quite staggered at the number of people we know that are carers or need care. And there's probably more out in the community that need care that we don't know about. And there's probably people that are caring that we don't know about, friends and family and that sort of thing. And it's a big thing. I'm not too sure whether the workload's increased with the lockdown, where the people needed more care during the lockdown, people on their own and all that sort of thing. But I'm sure it was. This has been recorded, so I'll get my wife to have a look at this later, but I'm married to a carer and she's magnificent. She cares for me. She cooks all my meals. She does all my washing.
Oh, look, I have to jump in there. I'm glad she does, and all power to you, but she's not a carer in the way that we're talking about it tonight. She might be a very caring person and she might care for you, but yeah, I want to leave it clean.
I'll leave your comments. I'll cut the film off when your comments come on, and I'll just. But thank you very much. I learned quite a bit, and I'm sure others here did and at home. So, Jennifer, thank you very much once again.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, everyone, and thanks for your generosity in inviting me. Bye-bye for now.
Okay, for those of you at home, we're about to break for a few minutes to allow the members present here to have a cup of coffee and a social chat. What's going to happen is that there's going to be some music played for about 5 minutes. And then following that, George Skarbek's going to put on a short video about drones. So those of you that are here present, it will be on the screen, so you can have your cup of coffee and watch it, or you can go up the back and have a chat amongst yourselves. Those present, if you haven't bought a raffle ticket, Choi and John over here are prepared to sell you a few more. And something I haven't got here, Kirsten, is the waffles. We waffling after this? Okay. So if anyone wishes to go to dinner after this, to the Waffle Sig, just see someone and we can give you the directions where to go. So enjoy your break.
Talk a little bit about drones. Could someone just put anybody who's unmuted, let me know. Is my audio coming through?
Yeah, good, George.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit about the drones. I was told I've got about 5+ minutes. I'll talk about a DJI drone, Spark, which is already superseded. And I'll share my screen and just show you a few photos of it. And something's gone very wrong. For some reason, I cannot. Oh, here we are. Share screen.
You've got that, George.
Okay. This is a particular drone I'll be talking about. And that's about the size of it. It weighs 300 grams. And it takes stills and movies, and you control it with your phone. And you can see how the first person view. It has a excellent stabilized video camera that shoots in high def and quite good quality still photos. That's a controller, and that's my phone. Unfortunately, there was a little bit of light reflected. I've just turned it on, and I'm not sure if you can see where the cursor's moving. It says it can't take off because there's no GPS. It has 3 modes. A beginner's mode. It's the beginner's mode in here. You must have a GPS for the beginner's mode. You have an advanced mode where you don't need GPS, like if you want to fly indoors, and a sports mode where you can fly quite fast, over 50 kilometers an hour. It has a range of 2 kilometers, but according to the regulations, you must be able to see it at all times. So basically, you know, a few hundred meters before it's a tiny speck that disappears. And it is limited to 100 meters, 400 feet. When I just wanted to go up and up over my house, just straight up, then we got to 120 meters. It also sends a message through your phone, which you can hear quite clearly, and it said you've reached a maximum height of 120 meters or 400 feet. And this is a photo. My house is dead in the center. That's the one in shadow. I've got a bloody big tree on the northern side, so I have solar panels on 3 sides. In winter, they spend a lot of time in the shade. So that's how high you're allowed to fly in Australia, unless you are registered with a bigger drone or for commercial. That is expensive, and I won't touch on that. Your drone has to be registered, but the registration is free. So just show you a video, but I'm going to stop sharing because I want to share the screen and optimize for a video clip, and it'll share the sound so it comes through the video. So we'll do this again. And this is taken in central New South Wales. I was going to go to Darwin, and the day after I left, South Australia blocked its borders. So I spent just over a week touring around New South Wales, went up to about 30k of the Queensland border to Lightning Ridge and just looked around. This is in central New South Wales. It goes for 2 minutes. That's a tiny town with the red dot. And my airport is the rooftop of my car.
Are there multiple cameras on the drone, George, or are you able to tilt the direction the camera's pointing?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Just saying, are there multiple cameras, or can you change the direction that the camera's pointing?
No, I'm just yawing. This is now stationary over a bit of ground, but I was yawing. Now you can yaw and rotate and descend, so you can control it in 3 axes simultaneously. As I'll demonstrate now, I'm descending. I'm going to fly laterally to the right, and then I'll also yaw, which is just like panning. Imagine panning with a 200-foot tripod. That's on wheels, so you can move it around. I like the artwork, so I filmed it a couple of times. But notice how still and stable this is. And that's my airport, the sunroof of the car. That's where I take off and land. So far I haven't missed, but might need a sort of a mid-course correction. That's a reflection in the rather dusty sunroof. And now the drone has landed. Okay, that's the short video. I'll stop sharing. And it's not my drone. It belongs to the video production SIG, MelbPC, and it's available for loan at no charge. You just have to be a member of the video production SIG. To join the video production SIG, you go to the main page, and from there, as many of you know, you can subscribe yourself to whatever SIGs you're interested in. So if you want it alone, say for a week or so, just become a member of the video SIG and it's yours. I will provide some basic training, give you manuals. You'll have to download just one bit of software, free software from Google Play. However, sort of a semi-disclaimer. If the drone doesn't come back, let's say it's lost at sea or stuck 150 metres up in a fork of a red gum over the Murray, the club had to buy a couple of batteries and a cable, and that came to about $150. So you'll have to agree, if you don't bring it back, you'll have to pay the group $150. But unless you do something really silly, because in the beginner's mode and even the advanced mode, not in sports, you can't fly into things. It's got a sensor and it won't let you come within 1.5 meters of an object, but you can fly upwards. It's also got return to home. So if you have lost it, press a button and it'll climb to, I think, 150 feet and come back to where it's landed because it's got the GPS. The reason why I was going to fly 150 feet so it doesn't fly through a tree or power line or a house on the way back. Any questions, folks?
George, I know you can fly. Do you require the ability to fly one of these things?
No, no. I know I'm a pilot, and my pilot training did bugger all. It's totally different because you're sitting in an aircraft and you're manipulating the joystick. You've got rudders. In here, you fly with your thumbs. Very, very different, and you can see where you're going. It's not difficult to fly. Fairly easy. You can fly in beginner's mode in your house. It won't let you fly into walls, or just go to some park. Some national parks you need permission, and try flying in the open. Just fly backwards, forwards, up and down, and within 15-20 minutes of flying, you should feel reasonably confident. The battery has a lifespan of about 15 minutes in the 2 batteries. So you can go and fly for half an hour before you have to recharge the batteries.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, very knowledgeable crowd or totally disinterested at the moment.
I just say, George, well done.
No, thank you, Colin.
George, you said you need to be licensed. Is it the drone that needs to be licensed or the user?
The drone must be licensed. It cannot be licensed to a corporation or a department. It has to be a person. And CASA, that's a Civil Aviation Safety Authority, is taking that bit seriously. It asked for my passport or driver's license, so I gave them the passport number, and then they still wanted my Medicare number as well as the address, date of birth, etc., etc. Because of that, when I was touring, I went to Lightning Ridge, and I thought, oh, it'd be nice to have a look at the diggings from the air. I tried to take off, and it said, you can't, you're within 5 kilometres of an airfield. I've asked, there was actually someone nearby, and I said, is there an airfield nearby? And they said, yeah, look, just at the end of this street. there's an airfield, the flying doctor comes. So I thought, he'll probably come once a fortnight, and if that. So when it says, do you really want to fly? And so of course I said, yes. Then it says, please enter your mobile number. And I thought, that could be a $10,000 flight. That's how much it gets charged for flying within 5 kilometres of an airfield. The other thing is that I believe I heard from another reliable source, which I haven't tried, you cannot fly over a prison or within, certain distance of a prison. So if you've got any friends in the prison, you can't fly over and drop something for them because of the GPS. In sports mode, you may be able to defeat it, but I haven't tried. Any other questions?
Yes, George. What is the price of one of these if you're interested in buying one?
The prices vary from about $35 to about, well, a big drone is about 10 million, but you can fly that anywhere on Earth, and it comes with 2 rockets, so you can shoot and kill anyone you don't like.
That one you were using.
That one is superseded. That was $800. DJI is by far the world's largest producer of drones. The cheap ones, sub $100 with video. The video is not stabilized, and you cannot move the camera down. It's sort of facing like this. So the photo I showed you of my house looking vertically down, you can't, because you'd have to dive, and you don't dive with a drone. It comes down. Right. So for a good quality, they have a cheaper models that have improved over the time. $500, $600, $700 will give you a good one. It can follow you. You can put in a track you want in the GPS, high quality videos, 4K stills, but you're looking at many hundreds of dollars.
Oh, one other question. Do you have to have insurance to fly one of these?
No, not insured.
How much did you have to pay to get that license?
No, that license is free.
Thank you.
That license is free. So if you come to borrow it from me, I won't give you my mobile number. You have to put in your own and then say it doesn't match the records. But no, it's licensed, and the license is free as long as it's under 2 kilos. This is way, way under.
Well, thanks very much, George. We might leave it there. Obviously,
Okay.
You did quite well without the music. We didn't need it. So thanks very much.
First of all, while I was sitting there listening to that lovely presentation from, what's her name, Jennifer, I thought, oh, okay, there's quite a few people who've contributed to this meeting. And so I started writing them down. I was surprised how many people it's taken to put this meeting together. So I thought I'd just, without setting a precedent necessarily, mention those that I listed here. First of all, thank you to Kirsten for organizing this and all these other meetings. We have Choi and John Morris doing the front desk and the raffle. Phil and Brian running the kitchen side of it. John Swell and Hugh in the bio box. Peter McConaughey and Stuart operating their laptops, and I'm not sure exactly what their functions are. And of course, Peter Bacon as MC. So that comes to about 10 people to put together a meeting like this, which is quite amazing, really. So congratulations to everybody. I'm sorry? Oh yeah, and the 3 attendees as well, which is, and this was 67 at home. I think we got 60, last count was 67 people at home. So yeah, so quite a successful, very successful meeting actually. Now I've got one little procedural thing I'm going to mention before I go on to the actual report. That at the moment, because of COVID, it's a little bit kind of on again, off again about whether the office is actually manned. It's been manned, should I say personed, most of the time. But if anyone out there who is thinking of coming into the office to pay their fees or what have you, jolly good idea to ring ahead just to be sure, because we can't really guarantee it. Marlene was unwell on Monday, for instance. She had a migraine, poor lady, and I don't know if there was any cover for her then, but very often Stuart will come in and be in, but we can't guarantee that will always be somebody there. Okay, down to the actual news. Some sad news, and I'm sure most members know about it by now. Some weeks ago, Judy Bednar, who was a very highly, I think, thought of member, very active on Yammer, was brutally murdered. I better not say by whom, though everyone knows who did it. It was quite a shock to everyone. It was a shock to me. I had never personally met her, I have to admit. I'd often sort of thought I might tootle on down to Chelsea and say hi, but I never did. There was quite a stir on Yammer, and some of the people there said, how about we do a bit of a collection in her memory? And long story short, we have donated on behalf of the club from members to charity, to Domestic Violence Victoria and Domestic Violence Resource Centre Victoria, two organisations that are currently in the process of merging. We donated $51 short of $5,000. So that was a pretty terrific effort and something I think we can all feel very good about. So thank you to everyone who contributed to that collection, and thank you for Peter McConaughey and to Marlene for coordinating the back office part of that as well. Something a lot more upbeat. I don't think I mentioned it here before. One of our members, Bill Ford, was awarded an Order of Australia recently in the Queen's Birthday Honours List. And I've got a list of his things that he's done. He's spent obviously a lifetime of doing working in charities and NFPs and the like. He's done work for, and that's really significant work with the Brotherhood of St. Lawrence. He's listed in the citation as MelbPC User Group Honorary Treasurer from between 1995 and 2017. It's actually 2 stints, I believe, 10 years and 1 year. So put in a lot there. The bit I like, he was in the Victorian Jazz Archive, rock on jazz. Melbourne City Mission, Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, Elsie Salter Salter House Day Centre. He was the CEO of the Victorian Deaf Society in the 1990s. Fitzroy Ecumenical Centre for Urban Research and Action in the 70s, Whitley College at the University of Melbourne, East Community Health Centre and Hanover Welfare Centre. So he's been really involved in the welfare sector substantially during his long career. So congratulations to Bill on that, on his gong. Something totally different, I had an appeal from Mike Allison, who's in ihelp. ihelp really need anyone who knows the Apple systems, particularly the iPhone, to maybe step forward, or please step forward, contact Mike and offer to become iHelpers on those products. So if you know your way around an iPhone, I certainly don't, your help would be greatly appreciated. It's not a necessarily big commitment, but to have someone that people can call if they're having trouble with their iPhones. The email transition program is proceeding very well. In the next few days, the last 200 members who have been identified as being users of the Microsoft system will be notified of their switch over to the Google system, Gmail system. At the moment, it's just about email. And after that, so yeah, that's all the people who actually actively use their MelbPC email addresses, as I understand it. Finally, and slightly related to that, Leighton West has been a member of MelbPC User Group for a long time. He's a very, I should say, rusted on Microsoft fan, and he was in very, very vehement disagreement with the switch over to Gmail, and consequently has resigned from the club. Effective from the 1st of July, but he still should be recognized. He's put in an awful lot for the club over the years, working as ihelp secretary, very conscientious. He's been running our 3CX telephone system and managing the database for that. And also the ihelp webpage, and a bunch of useful links to Microsoft, how to do it type tips for Microsoft software products. So thank you to Leighton. I guess Leighton isn't here to hear this, but thank you, Leighton, in absentia for the effort that you've put in. And lastly, but not leastly, but not lastly, as you're aware, we're trying to transform the club rooms here into something more modern, and we've changed the lounge, we've changed the training room to something else. If anyone would like to help out with practical skills with the workshop downstairs, that is sort of in a state where it needs to be tarted up a bit. If you're willing to come in with a screwdriver or a paintbrush or whatever it is, we'd like to hear from you. Probably the best thing to do would be to contact Marlin in the office and register your interest in helping. So that's it from me. And good night from him. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I notice you're sporting your printed tie. We're going to pass over to George again, who's going to give us a bit of a talk on monitors, what to do when purchasing a monitor. Thanks, George.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I've got a slideshow and I'll talk about it a bit. A few things to consider. Okay, if you're replacing your old monitor, what should you replace it with? There's no one single answer. Generally, in my opinion, bigger is better up to a limit. Bigger screen will certainly, in almost all cases, improve your productivity. In Word, you can have 2 full pages side by side, saves you scrolling up and down. In Excel, you can have your spreadsheet quite wide, and again, saves scrolling. However, my comments will be aimed more towards the photography side rather than Word, Excel, Notepad, or whatever. And when I say bigger up to point, there are some up to 40 inches wide. The normal viewing distance, you'd be going from side to side to side. So you have to set a normal distance and have a look. Don't get carried away by the huge size. Now, I mentioned the advantages in Office, but in Photoshop, you can see more tools and layers with how to scroll up and down, and the same applies to Lightroom. And of course, a larger image is always showing more details, very desirable. What's more, you can use your old screen as a second monitor. This will significantly increase your productivity. For a start, if you're doing something and you're not quite sure, you can watch a tutorial on one screen and working, say, in Photoshop to try to do the same thing on the main screen. It's got some disadvantages. It may not fit on your desk, especially if you've got shelves overhead. Keep in mind, with that in a stand. And if it's too big and you're sitting too close, you'll be moving your head too much side to side. It'll be slightly or moderately or a lot more expensive with a similar specs, and it'll use slightly more electricity, although that's really not significant. You're looking at $2 or $3 a year. Now, for some of the other factors you should consider, screen resolution is among the most important ones, and you need to consider the screen resolution. I looked at many screens and went to a few shops, and I decided on a 32-inch. Now, the resolution gave me the most problems in my case. Initially, I thought I'll have a 4K monitor, and this is clearly the best for photography. But when using Windows Explorer, other things, the text was small. And with my eyesight at the distance I sit from the screen, it was a bit hard to read and I was straining a bit. And this also applicable some menus. You can't make them bigger or smaller. I'll be straining for 4K because for the same size, the more pixels you put in, the smaller the text will be. So I settled on what is about a 3K, 2560 by 1440 pixels. And this was, to me, very noticeably better than my original full high def in many ways. And I have absolutely no regrets with this decision. And I'm not planning to upgrade it to 4K. A few other factors to consider. With a 4K, you can always drop to 2560 by 1440 for normal work and then restore it to 4K for other things. However, the 32-inch, the 4K monitor, or 4 times the size of a normal high def, when you reduce it below its native resolution, it will not give you as clear image as a native 2564 by 1440. And I still have no regrets with my choice in not going to 4K. Your eyesight is going to be different to mine. So I suggest you visit a shop or a couple and look at the displays. And sometimes they're locked, but in other times you can alter the resolution. So look at the resolution, and if it's maybe a bit small to read, then change the resolution and have a look to see if that's still okay as compared to a slightly lower resolution at its normal default res. It's your eyesight that'll make this decision for you. And that's important. Another thing, and this is certainly not for Word or Excel or Mail, but for photography, is the color gamut. It's important that the ability can replicate the RGB, that's red, green, blue colors sent from the graphics card. And the sRGB is the international standard. And look for the specs of your proposed monitor. You can look them up on the screen. Decent figure, it should be at least 99% of sRGB. You should see it. If you don't, it won't have it. Lower cost, you can buy a 4K monitor for surprisingly low cost from Kogan. They don't give you the RGB figure. Why not? Because if they give it, it looks like crap. So if it doesn't give you that detail, I personally wouldn't buy them. And with Kogan, you can't have a look at the colors, see how vibrant or pastely they look. And it gives you good results. And one of the causes why you can see something on your monitor and it doesn't print exactly the same hues or whatever could be that your monitor is not capable of doing a full RGB color gamut. There's obviously lots of other factors, you know, the profile for the monitor and so on, but the RGB gamut is important in printing what you see on the screen. Now, things which are not relevant to photography or Excel or Outlook is the frame rate or the refresh rate. These are things for gamers. Refresh rate is how often the monitor is refreshed, and it's usually expressed in hertz. And a good minimum value is 60 hertz. Most of them will do it. Higher frame rates are important to gamers, and speaking to one person who's keen on games, he said he can see the difference between 120 and 150 frames per second. I take my hat off to him. He's about a quarter of my age, but obviously his eyesight and reflections are outstanding, or he's a liar. And frame rate is how often the frame rates are displayed, and 30 frame rates is fine for photography and videos. Videos run at 24 frames per second. Most higher end will have better frame rate, like 50, 60 frames per second, which is different to the refresh rate. But for photography, office works, that's plenty. The only two games I have on my computer are chess and a bridge game. For me, 5 frames a second would be adequate. And my monitor does a lot more. Now, if you're buying a larger monitor for a laptop, let's say you've got a 13 or 15-inch laptop, your eyesight is not as good as it was a decade or two ago, and many people put in a big monitor for your laptop. Now, there's a gotcha or two. Many laptops will support only up to 1920 by 1080, which is full HD. Some smaller ones don't even go as high as that. A few very expensive ones will support a higher resolution. And it depends on the graphics card in the laptop. You also need video cables that will support the higher data rates, HDMI or DisplayPort. There's quite a number of monitors that sold without cables, just to drop the cost by $10 or whatever, which I think is pretty lousy of them, but to assume everybody by now will have some cables. Well, not everyone, especially if you've got an old VGA cable. VGA is an old analog, very old analog signal, and it cannot drive a 4K. And I don't believe any laptop with a VGA port can put out a 4K signal. It's actually quite easy to, in Windows, to have your laptop and external work independently or show the same thing, very much bigger, so you can close the screen or almost close it in some cases. Now, for the best results, the external monitor has to operate at its highest native resolution. Otherwise, it just won't look as good. Now, if you look at the specs of your laptop, for the screen resolution, that will tell you the highest is, screen resolution of the laptop is high def, 1920 by 1080. However, if they have a dedicated and a reasonably good dedicated graphics card, not a part of the graphics on the CPU, the graphics card may be able to put out a higher signal than your laptop is capable of showing on the screen. In other words, your laptop can be high def, but it may be capable of driving a 4K monitor, which is 4 times the resolution. But you'll have to dig fairly deep to find out whether it can. Normally in the specs, when you're buying the laptop, it won't be shown. You've got to look at the graphics card. So that's a quick summary. Does anybody have any questions?
I logged myself out accidentally, George. Did anyone ask about the custom scaling on Windows screens?
I'm sorry, there was
custom scaling, whereby you can enlarge everything without changing the resolution.
No, nobody asked you. Yes, in Windows you can. It's got it built in. You can scale things up, and also you can change the size of your icons, and you can change the size of the text that is displayed.
Did you try that?
Yes, I did. And that works in many cases, but not all.
Okay.
For instance, some programs that have a fixed menu, drop down and pull out a lot of things from the menu, that will not scale up if you change the text on the desktop. This is built into the application over which you have no control.
Right.
Sorry, I mentioned that briefly.
Okay.
George?
Yes?
I have a 13-inch PC, and what I did is something similar to you, except my 13-inch has got a touch screen. So a few years ago, I went on a search for a large monitor with a touch screen.
Yes.
Now, I've had it for about 2 or 3 years now. It's a ViewSonic, and it's fantastic.
Oh, good.
In that respect. Now, at the time, it was just about, I don't know if it was any bigger one, but when I found it, they gave me a demo. I purchased it, and I'll tell you what, it's, by the way, it's connected via the HDMI.
Yes.
So all of these tricks have been on a trial and error basis to see what's on the market, B, is it big enough for me? Yes, it is big enough for me. And it's, you said some people prefer the 32 or 40 or 40 plus. I hate to see a 55-inch monitor and standing in or sitting in front of a 55-inch monitor, but that's another story. So just my comment on that, George. Thanks very much for your experience, which reflects what I've done. With the only difference is I've got a touch screen.
Yeah.
Whereas you haven't gone down that way.
No, because I set a hour back, and spending a few hours at the screen with my arm outstretched, I would get very tired.
Fair enough.
But that's personal choice.
Oh, look, I find the touch screen convenient after I'm typing away, and I just reach forward to do one or two actions. But 80% of my actions on the keyboard, and yes, I agree with you. If you're on the screen all the time, nah.
Yeah. Also, I tend to use a keyboard a fair amount.
Yes.
Less than the mouse. I use DOS for shortcuts and macros. So I don't use the touch screen much. It's personal, very personal preference.
Yes.
The same. Some people would like very bright, vivid colors. Others would like a more pastel color. There is no right or wrong. Go to the shops and compare a few, and you'll find differences. And one person say, "Gee, that's good," and the other one says, "Bullshit. You know, this one is better." There is no right or wrong. I've just given you a few tips which are important to me. So, but I appreciate your comments. That was much appreciated. Any other quick questions?
Thanks very much, George. No, we might leave it at that. I think when the meeting concludes that Zoom will still be running if anyone wishes, if you're hanging around. But thanks very much, George. I'm sure everyone learned a bit from that, and maybe they'll all be
Leighton West, who was a very active member in our group. He was also a very controlling member. Certainly gave us a tough time. He was very, very capable though. Really knew a lot of his computer knowledge, particularly as it was mentioned before. He was very close to Microsoft, and he was very good with any Microsoft Windows issues as well. So I used Leighton quite often to help me with issues I had with, I used Microsoft Outlook for my emails, and he's helped me out quite a bit with that and refining some of the functions for that. So Leighton will be sorely missed in several ways. One for his very technical expertise, but yes, he was also quite a tough guy to to get along with. But I think he meant well, obviously, just that he was very set in his way and believed that anything outside of that was wrong, you know, and so that always made it very difficult. But anyway, Leighton was great, and yeah, we will miss him quite a lot. Particular gentleman who's had very bad memory issues. He's obviously suffering from some sort of dementia, and it really got too much there for a while. He was ringing me nearly every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times, and he would say, "I can't do a thing on my computer," and I'd join him on using Quick Assist, and there was nothing wrong with his computer. And I'd say, well, what's the problem? He'd say, "Oh, I can't get my emails." And anyway, and then you'd go through it, and the next day, he'd ask you exactly the same question and tell you exactly the same issues that we was having. I discussed his situation with his wife, and I think that they appreciated his problems. He had some other issues. I think it was his blood pressure medication or something, which limited him from taking any type of medication that would have helped him with his memory issues. And so, yeah, he was sort of between a rock and a hard place. But anyway, I think he's now getting constant help from his family, and perhaps not using his computer as much, because I haven't heard from him for about 2 weeks, I think, which is very rare. So another story that might be of interest. Recently, we had another one of our fairly frequent callers, and this particular person has very severe limitations, but he's very bright, and he is very keen to keep his computer. He's 96 years old. He's got macular degeneration, and George mentioned before about screens. Well, this gentleman, I think his screen would be about probably 30 plus, maybe 35-inch screen or something. It's a huge screen, and he also uses the ability on the computer to multiply the size of the particularly the words and printing, and he was right up to 200% on that, which is the maximum setting. And on this huge screen, I mean, each letter seemed to sit out about that size almost, but he needed it fairly big to be able to see it with his macular degeneration. So his latest issue was he was having a problem with a lot of photos that he's collected over years, his background is Dutch. He's got a lot of relatives in Holland, and he wanted to send them photos. And obviously, he couldn't just attach photos to an email and send it off, because he had a lot of photos. One of the people that assisted us with this was Philip Lynch. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with Philip Lynch, but he's very, very capable on computer help, and he's actually part of the team that's changing the from Microsoft to Google. Anyway, I asked about changing this gentleman to Google. He was ready to change, but he had to physically do the change himself. He wasn't able to do it. So Philip Lynch helped him with that. And the idea was that once he was on Google, he could then use Google Photos or some equivalent to that, so that he could attach a lot of photos and put them up for his relatives to see and to copy from in Holland. So we took quite a while to do that, but there were all sorts of other options, just Dropbox and things like that. But I just felt that with anything he had to send links or it was quite difficult then for his family, who also weren't necessarily that strong in computers. So trying to make it as easy as possible. So that's still a work in progress, but we've just about got him fixed up to do it on his Google Photos. Part of the problem also was when Philip was helping him. Philip is very enthusiastic and very knowledgeable on computers, and he started to talk to this guy on what he could do, and it was just too much for him. It was starting to confuse him. So Philip said he was going to leave him for a week, and he'll go back, and we'll make sure he's set up in at the end of this week. What other notes did I have here? Yeah, I think that's about, some of the stories that might have been interesting, and just gives you an idea of the sort of variation. Most of our problems are fairly basic with people who just have fairly minor problems with their computers. But anyway, we'll leave it open to questions now. Now, I won't be able to answer them all because I'm no super expert, but someone within our group will probably be able to answer it if I can't, which is very likely I won't be able to. So we'll leave it open for questions.
Bert, Hank Fisher here.
Yes, Hank.
Philip is part of our Casey group, and although he hasn't been coming to every meeting or Zoom meeting that we've had lately, excuse me, I have to clear my throat.
You're right.
Anyway, I might have a talk to him, being Dutch myself, from way back, but I can still handle the language. Maybe if Philip wants some translation work done for this guy.
Oh, I see.
I might be able to help him so that we can translate it for the people in Holland.
Yes.
To use the instructions that he might prepare.
Yeah, I think his English is quite good. I don't think that will be a problem. Thanks very much. But yes, we'll keep that open in case he doesn't need it for certain.
Yes, just
things.
mention Hank to him. Philip will know who it is. So if Philip needs help with that, I know Philip to be someone who is he's got thousands and thousands of photos that he's archived from way back. So he's always talking about his photos, and whenever he's done a presentation at Casey, it's all been about archiving photos.
Right.
He's a good man on that.
Bert, I'd just like to say a comment.
Yes, sure, George. Thanks.
I know the gentleman you were speaking to. He's been ringing me and asking for help, and I've been doing remote sessions with him as well, with the photos to show him how he forgot where somehow managed to uninstall Photoshop He wanted to do panoramas. He's still with it, but as you said, his screen, when I look at, very large font, huge.
It is very huge. Yes, he's also got, he's really struggling, but it hasn't phased him. He's still quite happy to keep trying.
I know, for a guy in well into his 90s, he's amazing.
He is, yeah, and he's got hearing aids in both ears, and so he has difficulty hearing. But if you speak slowly and clearly, he's not bad. But I think he had a bit of trouble with Philip because Philip's very enthusiastic, and he'd run, he'd go 10 to the dozen when he started talking.
Yeah. Can't do that with that gentleman.
No, he couldn't. So anyway, we're working out what to do, and we'll set him up with a Google Photos so that he can then give the links to his family overseas. Yeah. Thanks, George. Yeah.
Hello. I have a question which is more hardware than software. I don't know whether anyone can help me. I have about a 5-year-old Acer laptop, and the power connection is becoming quite intermittent. And I'm told that it's a common problem on laptops that when they get plugged in and out a lot, the connector comes loose on the motherboard or whatever. My question is there any easy way to get into a laptop? Is there any clues? Because I haven't even tried to get it apart, but I'm scared of what to do.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone else has an answer to it. I know there was a guy who was very good with laptops, very close to the Moorabbin. He's just around the corner from our Moorabbin offices. I don't know if he's still there, but he's fixed up a few work laptops for me that crashed, and put new motherboards even in laptops that normally wouldn't be able to replace motherboards. Has anyone else got any? Yes, George.
Yeah, I pulled a few laptops apart, and they vary from relatively easy to bloody near impossible. On mine, I want to put in more memory, and it involved removing one and one only screw, going click, and within 30 seconds from the time I put my screwdriver onto the laptop, it was done. That's the good news. The bad news for some to get underneath, you have to remove your keyboard because you can't go from underneath and come in from the top, especially where the batteries are. And removing the keyboard is difficult. Many small screws, flimsy connectors. You can do a lot of harm if you're just going in thinking, oh, what happens if I do this? You may be lucky, but you may screw it up completely. I can't give you a definitive answer, but on the whole, they're tricky to work with.
Yeah, maybe I need a new laptop.
Sorry, go ahead.
Can I say something?
Me? Talking me?
Tom? Is that Tom?
Tom Morado here. If you are in the vicinity of East Burwood, Mount Waverley, there is a professional. He's at the corner of Highbury Road and Middleborough Road. And that's, I think he's very skillful in doing this, and he doesn't charge an arm and a leg.
Yeah, that's right in my area. What's the name of the place?
His name is Francis, and his business is Microland. And the telephone number 9887 is 9990.
That's 9887 9990.
Yes, and he has a mobile 0407 270 910.
Okay, thanks, Tom. I might take.
Well, you got the mobile, but by the way, he only works don't ring him on a Monday. That's his day off, and he works from 10 to 4 only. He's semi-retired, but he has a shop front there, facing Middleborough Road near Highbury Road.
Okay, I wrote it down. Quite often we have people who we can't help anymore because the equipment's broken, and it's really good to have someone reliable that we can suggest to them to get their computers fixed. It's great.
Well, let me know how you go, Alan.
Yeah, thanks, Tom.
Well, my email is trado@MelbPC. T for Tom, RADO.
Yep, got it. Thank you.
Bert, we might just take one more question and then we'll formally end the meeting. And if you're happy to hang around, we'll do that. So is there one more question for Bert?
Well, for the panel, really, I'm not sure I can answer many.
Well, there's a deathly silence, which is probably good enough to formally end the meeting. And as I said, I think Zoom will be running for a while. Those of you that wish to have an informal chat or speak to ask a question, you're most welcome. But thanks everyone for attending. Thank you, Kirsten, once again for organising it and helping me. And the next meeting. The next meeting is August the 4th, a Wednesday at 7 o'clock. Maybe we might be let loose a bit more, and more of you may wish to attend the meeting. But thanks very much, and we'll see you all next month.